This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. The U.S. today defending Ukraine's offensive into Russian territory. That's as Moscow conducts counterattacks while criticizing Kyiv's Western allies. It's accusing Ukrainian forces of killing civilians and questioning the goals of the cross-border assault.
We're not engaged in any aspect or planning or preparation for this operation.
The State Department on Tuesday spoke about Ukraine's offensive into Russia's Kursk region. Thousands of Ukrainian soldiers smashed through the Russian border a week ago in a surprise attack. Ukraine's military released this video on Tuesday, showing a soldier at a road sign in the Kursk region amid the incursion. While denying involvement, the State Department defended Ukraine's actions.
Ukraine is defending itself from that aggression. This has been Kremlin's war of aggression from the start against Ukraine, pure and simple.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has previously said that Ukraine's goal is to improve its negotiating position. Russia's ambassador to the United Nations condemned international support for Ukraine on Tuesday.
I would be grateful for the explanation how intentionally targeting civilians serves the goals of disrupting attacks on Ukrainian territory, given the fact that there were no military objects or infrastructure in the area.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky published a new video explaining the goal of the incursion.
The more Russian military presence is destroyed in the border areas, the closer peace will be for our state and true security. The Russian state must be held accountable for what it has done, and it is being held accountable.
Russia is currently conducting counterattacks, saying this has slowed down the Ukrainian offensive. Thousands of residents have been evacuated from the Kursk region.
And Iran today dismissing calls from 3 European countries. They are urging Iran to refrain from any retaliatory attacks that would further escalate regional tensions. On Monday, the leaders of France, Germany, and Britain called on Iran and its allies to exercise restraint toward Israel. This is after the killing of Hamas political chief in Tehran, which Iran blames Israel for. Iran said the calls for restraint lack political logic and contradict principles of international law. The European leaders also endorsed the latest push by mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and the U.S. to broker an agreement to end the Israel-Hamas war. Talks are expected to resume Thursday. Today, the State Department said Qatar will try to convince Hamas to participate in Thursday's peace talks. Hamas has so far declined to agree to take part in ceasefire negotiations. Meanwhile, the Israel Defense Forces are keeping up the pressure on terrorists in the Gaza Strip as well as in Lebanon. This comes as Israel says it's ready for escalation with the Iran-backed Hezbollah terrorist group in Lebanon. NTD's Jason Perry has the story.
On Tuesday, Israeli forces released drone footage of an armed terrorist cell in the Gaza Strip, then hit them with a precision strike, allowing the horse to survive. The Israel Defense Forces, or the IDF, also released video of an apartment building in the heart of a civilian neighborhood where terrorists had a gunfight with Israeli troops. And they also found this tunnel entrance connected to the room. In the last few days, the IDF reported killing about 100 terrorists in Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip as they try to defeat the Hamas terrorist group. Meanwhile, on Monday, a spokesperson for the Hamas military wing said one male Israeli hostage was killed by a guard, and 2 female hostages were severely wounded in 2 separate incidents in the Gaza Strip. The IDF responded to Hamas's statement by saying they did not have any information that would allow them to refute or confirm those claims. An IDF spokesperson said this about the hostages in the Gaza Strip.
We are deeply concerned about their physical and mental condition, given the prolonged time that has passed and the harsh conditions of their captivity. The IDF and all of the security agencies are making every effort to create the conditions for their return as quickly as possible.
And residents in the Gaza Strip appear to be caught in the middle as they continue to move from one place to another for safety.
They dropped leaflets asking us to leave Hamad City, and until now we have been in the street not knowing where to go.
The occupation forces told us to leave this area, but we did not find a place to stay in. So I had to return to the same place that is dangerous.
And also on Tuesday, the IDF reported striking Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon and also hitting an observation post and a Hezbollah military structure. In addition, the IDF said they intercepted a military drone from Lebanon that was headed to Israel. These latest strikes come as the IDF said they are at peak readiness for escalation with the Iran-backed terrorist group in Lebanon. And the United States has approved $20 billion in weapon sales to Israel. This latest development comes as tensions continue to escalate in the Middle East. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Vice presidential candidate Governor Tim Walz speaking in California today at his first solo campaign event. And Vice President Kamala Harris says she'll reveal her economic policy in a speech this Friday. NTD's Jason Blair has the latest from the Harris-Walz campaign.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is holding his first solo events since joining the Harris ticket. He's scheduled to be in 5 states over 3 days, starting with California on Tuesday. In Los Angeles, he spoke at the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees Convention.
Vice President Harris and I have both had the privilege of joining workers on the picket line. And it's why, as governor, I signed one of the biggest packages of pro-worker policies in history into law.
This is the second union crowd that Walz has addressed. He and Vice President Kamala Harris delivered remarks at a union hall in Detroit last week. Walz, a former teacher, is said to be a former union member, with at least 2 unions claiming that he was on their roster in the past. Last October, he joined a picket line with auto workers in Plymouth, Minnesota. After LA, he hopped down to Newport Beach to speak at a Harris-Walz campaign event there. Then on Wednesday, he'll visit both Colorado and Massachusetts, and on Thursday, he'll finish his tour with campaign events in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Harris reportedly recorded a message for the upcoming Democratic National Convention in Chicago. She's also scheduled to deliver an economic policy speech Friday in North Carolina, making good on her promise to reporters last week. And with Elon Musk recently hosting a virtual talk with former President Trump on X, Musk also extended an invitation to Harris for the same. The vice president has not yet responded to the offer. Both Harris and Walz will be at the 4-day Democratic National Convention next week. The details of their schedule have not been released. However, Harris will be formally accepting the Democratic Party's nomination and is expected to close out the convention on the last day as the keynote speaker. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Former President Trump's live interview with Elon Musk pulling in a combined 1 billion views, according to the tech CEO. Musk is now proposing a similar chat with Vice President Kamala Harris, while her campaign takes aim at technical glitches during Trump's interview. NTD's Ernesto has more.
The Trump campaign is taking a victory lap as it touts numbers from Trump's 2-hour live interview with Elon Musk on Monday night. According to the Trump campaign, 25 million X users listened to the entire chat from start to finish. 1.5 million listeners were listening to it live, and over $1 million was raised from a specific link for the interview. Musk further touted that the interview, along with subsequent discussions, pulled in a combined 1 billion views. The chat, which marked Trump's return to X after nearly a year, covered a variety of topics, including the assassination attempt.
I'm a believer. Now I'm more of a believer, I think, and a lot of people have said that to me. A lot of great people have said that to me, actually. But it was amazing that I happened to be turned just at that perfect angle.
Inflation and government spending.
I think we need like a government efficiency commission to say like, hey, where are we spending money that's sensible? Where is it not sensible? Right. And we need to live within our means.
And threats facing the country.
The biggest threat is nuclear warming.
But Trump and Musk on Tuesday complained that the mainstream media focused more on the technical glitches which delayed the interview for 40 minutes instead of on the actual impact of the conversation. Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign, meanwhile, is fundraising off of Trump's interview, accusing Trump and Musk of trying to sell out the middle class and not being able to run a live stream in the year of 2024. And the United Auto Workers on Tuesday filed federal labor charges over comments by Trump and Musk supporting firing employees who threatened to strike.
Well, you're the greatest cutter. I mean, I look at what you do. You walk in and you just say, you want to quit? They go on strike. I won't mention the name of the company, but they go on strike and you say, that's okay, you're all gone.
And Musk now says he's happy to host Harris on a next basis too. Reporting by Iris Tao, NTD News.
Bolstering Secret Service protection has become a priority for lawmakers in the wake of the assassination attempt against former President Trump. A new bill today seeks to strengthen security for government leaders and candidates. But how much is still unknown about the shooting? NTD's Sam Wong brings us the latest.
Take a look at what happened.
It's been exactly a month since former President Trump was shot at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. Marking the occasion on Tuesday, Democratic Congressman Richie Torres introduced a bill that will ramp up Secret Service protection for political leaders and candidates. Under the proposal, the agency will be compelled to expand the security perimeter to at least 500 yards at public events, shielding candidates from potential gunfire while covering any elevated position within that range. The shooter, 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks, opened fire from a rooftop located roughly 150 yards from the podium. Here's Trump in a conversation with Elon Musk on Monday, recounting the moment he felt the bullet.
I'm a believer. Now I'm more of a believer, I think. It was a miracle. If I hadn't turned my head, I would not be talking to you right now, as much as I like you.
Exactly.
Police body cam footage shows an officer encounter Crooks just moments before the shots were fired. He was hoisted up by his colleague to get on the rooftop, but immediately dropped down after he spotted the suspect.
Told them they need to post the guys over here. I told them that the Secret Service. I told them that Tuesday.
Security lapses at the rally quickly drew scrutiny from Congress, even prompting then Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheeto to resign. Today, that pressure is still there. A bipartisan House task force on Monday sent letters to the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security, demanding all information surrounding the incident. Lawmaker also requested a briefing from relevant agencies by August 16th. Last month, Torres, along with Republican Congressman Mike Lawler, spearheaded legislation aimed at enhancing protection for all candidates, including Trump, President Biden, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. As the investigation continues, the shooter's motive remains unknown to this day. Sam Wang, NTD News.
A hurricane watch has been issued for the U.S. Virgin Islands. Tropical storm Ernesto intensifies, bringing heavy rain, damaging winds, and a potentially life-threatening storm surge to the Caribbean. NTD's Christina Corona updates us on the storm.
Tropical storm Ernesto strengthened Tuesday morning as it headed for the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, where it could bring strong winds and heavy rain with up to 10 inches in some areas. As of Tuesday morning, Ernesto sustained winds of 50 miles per hour, moving slightly north of west at 18 miles per hour. The storm was located about 250 miles east-southeast of San Juan, Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico activated the National Guard and postponed the start of public school classes in anticipation of Tropical Storm Ernesto, which forecasters warn will hit the U.S. territory.
We have initially identified 200 to 250 military personnel that are going to be participating between today and tomorrow in pre-positioning equipment in different areas, coordinating with the road access, identifying access activity, and also therefore mitigating distress or danger to life in different residential areas.
Ernesto is forecasted to become a hurricane by early Wednesday, leading forecasters to issue a hurricane watch for the U.S. and British Virgin Islands, along with the small Puerto Rican islands of Vieques and Culebra.
The biggest thing that concerns us about this weather system first is the large amount of rain that may be falling in between 2 to 3 days. We're talking between 6 to 8 inches.
The National Hurricane Center stated Ernesto may strengthen into a hurricane after passing the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, potentially reaching 74 miles per hour winds by Thursday when it's expected to be north of the Greater Antilles. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Morgan Stanley Capital International dropped 60 China stocks from its indices, part of a long trend. The story of China's economy continues down a dark road.
More bad news for China's economy. Morgan Stanley Capital International, or MSCI, has dropped 60 China stocks from its indexes. Trillions of dollars in managed assets use MSCI as a benchmark.
People are going to take money out of China because they want to mimic the index. Now look at the economy, it is clearly stumbling.
China expert Gordon Chang says this is part of a larger trend.
MSCI dropped 56 Chinese stocks in May and 66 in February. So it's clear where this is all going. And it's a real indication of the problems inside China.
Chang says Communist Party policies are isolating China from the rest of the world. And this is making Chinese stocks less attractive.
If you look at the MSCI China index over the last year, it's essentially had no growth. And that's not good as an investor.
Economist Riley Walters says there are still many Chinese companies in MSCI's indexes, but he suspects more may be dropped in the future.
Foreign direct investment pulling out at historic levels. We're seeing no demand. We're seeing manufacturing employment decrease. They're in a downward cycle right now. And, people, they have different terms for it. Doom cycle might be one of them.
Walter says China's economy will have to crawl up a high hill to regain the confidence of international investors.
Rare earth minerals are essential in our everyday life. They're used to make mobile phones, televisions, and also military equipment. But a report warns China's near total control over the world's rare earth minerals leaves the West in a compromising position. And it calls for the Five Eyes Alliance to make moves to reduce their dependence on China. Here's NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson with more.
Western nations face a potentially major national security risk. China controls some 60% of the world's rare earth minerals and processes around 90% of them, a near complete monopoly. Helena Ivanov, Associate Research Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, said this leaves the West extremely exposed to China.
For the United States, this is particularly problematic because not long ago, the United States was one of the leading countries when it comes to exporting rare earth minerals. But then in the subsequent years, America basically increased step by step its reliance on China and nowadays imports as much as 80% of rare earth minerals from China.
Rare earth elements are a set of 17 metallic elements essential for many technology applications, from mobile phones, magnets and MRI machines to cars and military equipment like fighter jets. Ivanov's recent report, Decreasing Rare Earths Dependency, warns that in the event of a confrontation with the US, China could block supplies and deplete the US's stock of essential defense minerals in less than 90 days. That could leave defense systems compromised. The good news for the US, Ivanov says, is that recent administrations have taken steps in the right direction.
Both under Trump administration as well as Biden's administrations, steps have been taken to ramp up domestic production in the attempt, of course, to reduce this dependence on China.
She said this cannot be done overnight and expects it could take at least 10 years' time. But it's important to start doing it now. Her report recommends the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, made up of the United States and 4 allies, to ramp up domestic production by operating old rare earth mineral mines more effectively, as well as opening new mines. She also recommends expanding their alliance to include trade of minerals between themselves, and looking beyond the alliance for other friendly countries to trade with, such as Sweden.
And finally, seek alternatives to rare earth minerals themselves. Tesla has committed to creating the latest generation of EV batteries without rare earths at all, so invest in that kind of research. But also, additionally, you could invest in e-waste recycling, which, according to some estimates, could potentially satisfy as much as a quarter of our demand for rare earth minerals.
Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Earlier, we spoke with Stephen Yates, former White House Deputy National Security Advisor and chair of the China Policy Initiative at America First Policy Institute, about current U.S. policy on China. Steve Yates, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, China Week is coming up, or when the House is set to vote on several China-related measures next month. Now, what's your feel for what bills could be voted on?
Well, there's a whole bunch of accumulated miscellaneous items that have been introduced and sort of went the way of most legislation, which is to get introduced, go into committee, maybe get a hearing, have some consideration, but then otherwise kind of lay in wait for another Congress. And so this is kind of last shot. There's a lot of things that were related to what the Select Committee on Strategic Competition with the Chinese Communist Party had put forward out of the committees of jurisdiction. But in some ways, it's a bit of a kitchen sink. There have been efforts to try to organize these by theme. My preferred theme would be to roll them together into kind of a China Reciprocity Trade Act. But that would drop some of the other topics. But really, you have something in almost every element of government that is available if they want to put it forward to vote on.
On that note, House Speaker Mike Johnson is saying that these bills would be individually introduced and voted on rather than as a larger bundle. He's saying that's in hopes there will be more bipartisan consensus. He's also saying the goal here is to, quote, empower the next administration to hit our enemies' economies on day one. Now, how successful do you see that strategy being?
Well, in the House of Representatives, I think there's fairly good chance that everything that is related to the strategic economic relationship probably will have a good chance of passage with bipartisan support. That is the largest, most detailed report that came out of the Select Committee. It's where senior members on both parties have been vocal about pushing for things. Where bipartisanship has fallen apart more has been things related to the border, sometimes even on fentanyl, some things having to do with high tech. Those are areas where things got a little bit sketchier, including even on domestic things having to do with influence operations, fake police stations. That got conflated with ethnic profiling in some of the congressional deliberations. So those are the areas where bipartisanship gets weaker for reasons that escape me, but I'm a partisan.
Now, news of China Week does come as China's Hesai, which makes LiDAR sensors used in smart cars, has been removed from the U.S. Defense Department blacklist. Now, what do you make of this U-turn, if you will? What does this signal in terms of the Pentagon's decision-making?
Well, first, there's a bit of a constitutional issue that I'm a little murky about. When you are looking at non-U.S. citizens and non-U.S. entities, what right to due process do they have in the United States? If we have a judgment that there's a national security concern and our Defense Department's procurement process expresses that concern and imposes a sanction or some other kind of hurdle, I am unaware of a legal process for them to seek redress. And that is where I think this is on the shakiest of grounds. I thought that it was important of all of the areas of American interaction and supply chains with China, that anything that is in the defense procurement area, we should basically have those that come from the People's Republic of China as guilty until proven innocent. That is the standard when you're dealing with national security and an entity that has been willing to challenge us, our allies, not just in military affairs, but on our own homeland and otherwise. So I'm a bit baffled by this reversal. I think it's an unfortunate 2 steps back in the progress we've made in recent times on bipartisan support for a more sensible approach to China and national security.
Now, on the other hand, what does this move mean for Hesai's global market expansion, given that it is already one of the world's top makers of LiDAR sensors?
Well, I hope that this is part of the kind of commentary and news cycle that provokes American entrepreneurs and allied entrepreneurs to grow this international space of sensitive technology and technologies that are vital to our way of life being controlled by, manufactured by like-minded nations. So it's not a matter of having to onshore all of this, although that's my first preferred option, but safe shoring and collaboration with allies like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and others. Really, we have to find a way so that we're not dependent on this being a node in the supply chain. If they're going to continue to manufacture and play in this space, that's one thing. But we have to, I think, become much less dependent on that being the dominant provider of this kind of technology.
And expanding on that, in your view, what are the strategies the U.S. should implement to best tackle the China threat, whether that's policy, the economy, or national security?
Well, I think the first most important step is American revival and renewal. I think that begins with a really hard look at our education system and making sure that we're educating and preparing a workforce that is capable of onshoring or developing the newest, best technology ourselves where possible. And so even when we look at major semiconductor manufacturing opportunities coming into the United States, we don't have a workforce today that is willing and able to sustain those. We have to import those workers, and they have to adapt to very different work schedules. And we don't have the skilled workforce to match in some of these cases. So it begins at home. We also have to have deregulation to make us a competitive and attractive place to invest, manufacture, and export. So that is an important prerequisite to doing this well. But second, I think we have to rebalance with our allies in ways that looks at collaboration. This really is about the free world and the civilized world that's willing to make reasonable standards that protect individual dignity, human dignity, and ethical transparency, and those that don't. And those that don't cannot be involved in sensitive supply chains, cannot be allowed access to the world's most advanced technologies. And I would make that space, artificial intelligence, the most advanced semiconductors, and anything that makes smart life possible. So we've got work to do to be more competitive and productive, and we have collaboration with allies to build that out. Fortunately, there's a lot of opportunity there. Our allies, together with the United States, comprise an immense proportion of the world economy, and this is a doable proposition with the right leadership. And that's the last variable that has to happen. We have to see clearly that the Chinese Communist Party is an adversary. It is not a trusted partner for cooperation and problem solving. Only if we get to that point can we establish the right kind of cooperation and rebalancing with our allies to do this right.
Steve Yates, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Selling bodies, the morbid hashtag tops search charge on China's social media, but has been wiped by censors. This after an indictment surfaced accusing a Chinese firm of stealing bodies from crematoriums, then dismembering them for profit.
A social media post shining a light on the business of turning human remains into profit in China. Just a warning, the following content may be disturbing for some viewers. A Chinese lawyer posted an indictment on the country's largest social media platform last Thursday. It accused a Chinese company of illegally procuring thousands of bodies nationwide, then, quote, brutally dismembering them and culling flesh from bones. The processed human remains were then sold as bone grafting materials. Bone grafting is kind of surgery that involves using transplanted bones to repair damaged bones in a living patient. It's widely used in dental surgery. The indictment said the company made over $50 million from such practices over 8 years. It allegedly sent staff to steal over 4,000 bodies from funeral homes and crematoriums. It also allegedly bought a dozen bodies from a doctor in Shandong. The doctor dissected body parts, froze them, then sold them for over $1,000 each. What's more, the Chinese company reportedly forged donor registration forms to obscure its illegal sourcing. And it didn't accept just any bodies. The deceased had to have been between 20 and 60 years old, and they could not have died from disease. Because of the requirements, a human rights activist is casting doubt where the bodies come from.
If those bodies did not come from those that died of disease, and also must be within a certain age range, it's reminiscent of the Chinese Communist Party's decades-long practice of forced organ harvesting.
Forced organ harvesting refers to the practice of harvesting organs from prisoners of conscience, then selling them for profit. An international tribunal in London concluded that members of the Falun Gong faith group were probably the main source of China's organ supply. Falun Gong is a mind-body spiritual meditation practice that has faced brutal persecution in China for over 2 decades. Most of the Chinese media reports related to the indictment have been deleted. We'll keep you updated as the situation develops.
Both the Trump and Harris campaigns are trying to appeal to voters with their economic policies. According to a new poll from the Financial Times and the University of Michigan, 42% of voters say they trust Harris more with the economy compared to 41% for Trump. Joining me now to discuss is economic policy analyst Samuel Gregg. He's the Friedrich Hayek Chair in Economics and Economic History at the American Institute for Economic Research. Samuel, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you now. To begin, this is the first time this election cycle that voters say they trust the Democratic candidate over the Republican one on the economy. What do you make of those poll results and what moved the needle in that direction?
Well, I wouldn't read too much into those poll results. And one reason is that we don't really know what Kamala Harris's economic policies are likely to be. We will get a sense of that later this week, I suspect. But I also think that this reflects a general upsurge in support for Vice President Harris, which is consistent with what we're seeing across the board in polling in general. And of course, President Trump is a known quantity. People have a sense of what he stands for economically. And so because I think Vice President Harris has at least been for the past 4 years a relatively blank slate on economic policy, we shouldn't be surprised that a lot of voters are excited or perhaps interested in the possibility of her offering some alternatives that they haven't yet encountered. So as I said, I wouldn't read too much into it. I think it just reflects a trend that's happening right now because of the unexpected ascendancy of Vice President Harris to be the Democratic candidate for president. The real detail will start to become more apparent when we get a better sense of what she has in mind. And at the moment, we're sort of looking back and looking at some of the policies that she's endorsed in the past. But we're living in a very different world compared to 2019 when she was running for president, let alone 2021 when she became vice president.
On that note, break down for us Trump's and Harris's economic track records, what those would mean for Americans if they became president, given that we are in a new climate now.
So I think with President Trump, we have a pretty clear sense of what he would like to do. He would like to, at a minimum, keep in place the tax changes that he introduced during his initial term as president. He'd like to keep those in place because those are due to expire very soon, and I think he sees that as part of his legacy. I suspect he would like to engage in more deregulation. He made deregulation part of his economic agenda last time around. He obviously has made it very clear that he wants to introduce a new tariff regime, particularly when it comes to China. So President Trump's economic policies, I think, are rather clear. And if anyone listened to Elon Musk's interview with him last night, it was very much what we expected. When it comes to Kamala Harris, the dilemma we face is that at least when she was in the Senate, for example, she followed pretty much the straightforward, progressive playbook when it came to economic policy, whether it was raising taxes, whether it came to healthcare, etc. In other words, she adopted and expressed policies that you would expect from a very liberal, very progressive senator from the state of California, which is one of the most liberal states in the country. But Vice President Harris knows that she's running for president of the United States, not president of California. And the rest of the United States is not like California when it comes to economic policy. So I think she's going to start shifting some of her policies in a much more what you might call centrist direction. Now, I don't expect that she's going to be necessarily offering tax cuts. I don't think she has much by way of deregulation as a policy. But I think it's fair to say that she won't be endorsing things like a single-payer healthcare system because she knows that that's deeply unpopular with the American population. So I think we'll see her shift to the center when it comes to economic policy. Whether she actually follows through on those policies, if she got elected, is a different story altogether. A lot would depend upon what the Senate looked like and what the House of Representatives looks like.
On that note, I want to dive into what taxes could look like under the next president. As you mentioned, Trump implemented the biggest tax code reform in decades. Meanwhile, also, as you mentioned, as Senator Harris co-sponsored legislation aimed to set up a single-payer health care system, which many economic analysts have noted would have to be financed through heavy tax increases across all income levels. What tax hikes or cuts could we see under a future Trump or Harris administration?
Well, at a minimum, as I said, I think President Trump would want to keep in place the tax cuts that he already passed back in his first term. I think, however, if he wanted to make a difference, and I suspect he does, he would go for lowering the personal income taxes. He would also try and lower corporate taxes. He's made that very clear. And I think that's one reason why a great deal of corporate America, whatever other reservations they may have about him, are not concerned by the prospect of a President Trump second time round. I think he would try to deliver on those promises to corporate America, and they have sounded very positive about that. With Vice President Harris, I suspect that she would let the Trump tax regime expire, and she would come up with a completely different plan. I'd be very surprised if she didn't try and raise the corporate tax rate. As I mentioned, she needs to portray herself as more as a centrist, but I think it's also important to remember that the Democratic Party has shifted leftward on economic policies over the past 10 years. It's not the Democratic Party of Bill Clinton anymore. It's a very different Democratic Party. And I find it very hard to believe that she wouldn't try and raise the corporate tax rate. There would be immense opposition to that from corporate America. But, raising corporate tax rates is something that's very popular with everyday Americans. So I think that's one thing. We also see a certain degree of convergence, for example, around getting rid of taxes on tipping, which I think is an interesting thing because it's clearly something that's very popular among the population and among particular voting segments of the population that both President Trump and Vice President Harris are vying for. The economic implications of that, however, would, I think, be rather different to what most people expect would eventually eventuate.
Now, Harris is expected to reveal her economic policy this Friday in a speech. What do you think she's likely to propose?
I suspect she's going to be relatively light on detail. Why do I say that? Because that has been her MO ever since she became the prospective Democratic nominee for the presidential election. So I think it's going to be light on detail. Second, she doesn't have a strong record in talking or thinking or commentating upon economic policy. That has not been the type of thing that she's involved herself in, whether it's things like taxation, etc. So my guess is that it will resemble some of the policies being pursued by President Biden. So that means industrial policy. I suspect that also means continuation of what has become, frankly, a bipartisan position when it comes to trade policy. I think she will talk tough on China. She'll talk about tariffs and protectionism when it comes to China. I also think that in terms of the domestic side of things, when it comes to taxes, as I mentioned, she'll use language like making everyone pay their fair share. I doubt that she'll get into specifics when it comes to tax rates because that would be a target for the Trump people to go after. So I suspect a big picture being painted. I suspect very little by way of detail. And I suspect that she'll also avoid questioning about the details of economic policy because, one, she's not very good, frankly, when it comes to answering these sorts of questions when she's questioned by the media. But also, I think more tactically, I think she'd want to give herself as much space as possible so that if she gets elected, she's not overly committed to any set of particularly detailed policies, which would leave open negotiation possibilities with whoever happens to be controlling the Senate as well as the House of Representatives.
Samuel Gregg, economic policy analyst and chair in economics at American Institute for Economic Research. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Heated primary contests, abortion on the ballot, and Democrats endorsing a high-profile Republican due to concerns over border security. NTD's Melina Weisskopf brings us the latest developments in key races.
Tonight, the final test for Progressive Squad lawmakers after two of them were ousted by pro-Israel opponents in their primaries. Unlike these two, whose opponents were boosted by floods of cash from a pro-Israel PAC, Minnesota's Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's opponent, Don Samuels, is not funded by the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Omar versus Samuels is a rematch from 2022, when Omar barely fended off her challenger by just 2 percentage points. And in the battleground state of Wisconsin, redrawn maps are said to favor Democrats, setting up a tough challenge in District 3 for Republican incumbent Derek Van Orden. 3 Democrats are competing tonight for the chance to challenge Orden, plus a new development in Arizona. A petitioning group got enough signatures to put abortion access on the ballot in the state. If a majority of Arizona residents vote for it in November, the state will allow abortions up to 24 weeks of pregnancy, and even longer if a doctor okays it for physical or mental health reasons. And in Texas, an unlikely coalition is gaining ground. Democrats for Cruz. Well-known Republican Senator Ted Cruz is receiving mounting support from local Democrat leaders and sheriffs at the border.
We are seeing a problem at our border, and I am taking this opportunity to endorse Senator Ted Cruz.
I have 108 miles of border, but in the last 2 years, border security has gone out of control.
There's too many problems with drugs, human trafficking, and fentanyl.
Cruz is trying for a 3rd term in the Senate, and now he's facing Democrat challenger Congressman Colin Allred. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
The Paris Olympics attracted a record number of viewers on TV and streaming services. According to figures published yesterday by France's National Bank, it has had a positive impact on the French economy. NTD's international correspondent David Vives has the details.
The Paris Olympics have proven to be a boom for the French economy. According to French tourism minister, the end of the Games has ushered in a surge in spending benefiting various sectors. Hotel spending in Olympic host cities jumped 16% compared to last year, while museum and restaurant sales soared by 25%. This uptick in consumer activity is reflected in broader economic forecasts. Institutional surveys suggest a notable economic uplift in the 3rd quarter, with the Bank of France predicting a growth rate of 0.35% to 0.45% up from earlier quarters. Figures also favor Paris 2024 advertisers and Comcast NBC Universal, which has broadcasting rights in the US. NBC Universal says a daily average of 30 million people watched its coverage of the Olympics. That's a whopping 82% more than the Tokyo Olympics. The Paris Olympics also set new records for streaming. NBC Universal reported 23 billion minutes of viewing time across its digital platforms. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.